There is no darkness quite as heavy as the one that fills a bedroom when you realize you are sharing it with your executioner. I lay rigid in the center of the California king bed, the down comforter pulled up to my chin, mimicking the rhythmic, heavy breathing of a man sedated by age and infirmity. The room was suffocatingly warm, the air thick with the cloying scent of lavender from the diffuser Elena insisted on running every night. I knew now that it was merely a sensory mask, a sweet-smelling fog designed to cover the stench of the grave she was digging for me. I am Marcus. I am 74 years old. For 40 years, I sat on the bench of the Superior Court, wearing black robes that weighed heavy with the responsibility of discerning truth from lies. I have looked into the eyes of murderers, con artists, and thieves. I prided myself on my ability to spot a liar from the twitch of a facial muscle or the cadence of a denial. I spent a lifetime judging the morality of strangers, believing I was immune to the deceit of the wicked. But lying here, forcing my lungs to take shallow, rattling breaths, while my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, I realized I had missed the greatest criminal of all, and she was standing 6 feet away from me, by the window. Elena, my wife. My beautiful, young wife, 30 years my junior. A woman I had pulled from the crushing weight of debt and obscurity, believing her affection was the genuine gratitude of a soul saved. I thought I was her knight. I was just her mark. I could feel the ghost of the evening tonic she had prepared for me, burning a hole in the soil of the potted fern across the room. Every night for the past month, she had brought me warm milk and honey, stirring it with a silver spoon, smiling that dazzling smile that used to make me feel young again. "Drink up, darling," she would say. "It has the natural supplements Dr. Kagan recommended for your joints." Tonight, however, I had seen the residue, a fine white powder that hadn't quite dissolved at the bottom of the mug. It wasn't a supplement. It was sediment. I hadn't drunk it. When she turned to fluff my pillows, distracting herself with the performance of the caring nurse, I had poured the steaming liquid into the dense foliage of the fern. Then I had wiped my mouth, feigned drowsiness, and let my eyes flutter shut. Now, I was waiting. "He's asleep," Elena whispered. Her voice cut through the silence of the room like a scalpel.
It was low, devoid of the warmth she faked during the daylight hours. It was cold, clinical. It was the voice of a woman who had stopped pretending. I kept my eyes closed, but my other senses were dialed up to a painful intensity. I heard the rustle of her silk robe. I heard the faint click of a lighter. She smoked out the window when she thought I was unconscious, a habit she swore she had kicked years ago. She was speaking to someone, but her phone, her iPhone 15, the one I bought her, was charging on the nightstand next to my head. I could see the faint green glow of the battery indicator through my eyelashes. She was using a burner, a second phone. "Yes, he took it," she murmured into the device. "He went down fast tonight." My blood ran cold. It was a physical sensation, a freezing of the veins that started in my extremities and rushed toward my core. She was reporting my sedation. She was logging my decline like a lab technician monitoring a rat. I needed to know who was on the other end of that line. I needed to know the architecture of this betrayal. Then, it happened. Bzzz. The sound was soft, a vibration against the mahogany of the nightstand. It was her real phone, the one sitting inches from my ear. Elena didn't hear it. She was too focused on her conversation by the window, too wrapped up in the smoke and the conspiracy. I took a risk, a massive, terrifying risk. I moved my hand under the covers. I slid it out slowly, inch by inch, keeping the rhythm of my breathing steady. In, out, rattle, pause. My fingers brushed the cold glass of the screen. I gripped the phone. I slid it under the comforter, pulling it tight against my chest. I waited to see if she noticed. No, "I can't talk long," she whispered by the window. "I have to make sure he doesn't wake up to pee." She hadn't seen. I curled into a fetal position, creating a tent of darkness under the heavy duvet. I pressed the side button. The screen lit up, a blinding flare of light in my private cave. I squinted, my eyes adjusting. Passcode. I knew it. I knew everything about her, or thought I did. It was her birthday, 061290. I typed it in. Unlock. The phone opened to her messages. The most recent notification was from a contact saved only as Doctor. I tapped the thread. The text that had just vibrated the phone was short, brutal. "Dr. K, did he take the double dose? We are running out of time." I scrolled up. My thumb trembled, hovering over the glass. I read the history.
It wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just a love affair. It was a blueprint for murder. Yes, he went down fast. He didn't even complain about the taste this time. Good. 2 more nights of this and the toxicity will reach the threshold. His heart will just stop. Natural causes. No autopsy for a man his age with a history of hypertension. Are you sure? If they test his blood, they won't test. I'm his doctor, Elena. I signed the certificate. I list it as cardiac arrest. It's clean. Just keep him sedated. I stared at the glowing letters. Dr. K. Dr. Kagan. My concierge doctor. The man I paid a retainer of $20,000 a year to ensure my health. The man who prescribed my heart medication. The man who had shook my hand last week and told me I had the constitution of an ox. He wasn't keeping me alive. He was guiding me into the grave. I lay there in the dark, clutching the glowing screen that detailed my own murder, listening to my wife plan my funeral with her lover. I wanted to sit up and roar. I wanted to throw the covers off, march over to the window, and strangle the life out of the lie we had built together. I wanted to be the judge again, to rain down fire and brimstone on the guilty. But if you've ever realized that the person sleeping next to you is actually an executioner waiting for the signal, hit that subscribe button, because Elena didn't know that the sleeping old man in her bed was a superior court judge, and I was about to pass a sentence she would never see coming. I forced myself to keep reading. I needed the motive. I needed the why. I scrolled back 3 days. He's talking about changing the trust again. He wants to leave more to the university. He can't. We need the liquidity, Elena. The sharks are circling. If I don't pay the bookies by the 15th, they break my hands. And if they break my hands, I can't practice. And if I can't practice, we have nothing. I know. But the prenup, the vesting clause, it vests next month, 10 years. If he dies before the anniversary, you get the stipend. If he dies after, you get half the estate. We need him to make it to the 14th, but not past the 15th. I froze. The prenup. I had written it myself. A strict, ironclad document designed to protect the assets I had built over a lifetime. It had a 10-year vesting clause.
If we divorced, or if I died before our 10th anniversary, she received a generous but limited monthly stipend for 5 years. But if we stayed married for 10 years, she became a full partner. She inherited 50% of the estate. Our 10th anniversary was in 2 days. They weren't trying to kill me before the anniversary. They were trying to kill me exactly on the anniversary. They were dosing me to weaken my heart, to build up the toxicity, so that on the night of the celebration, the night I became worth $50 million to her, my heart would simply give out. They were threading a needle with my life. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was the mourning of the man I used to be, the man who believed in love. That man died in this bed tonight. The woman by the window moved. "I have to go," she whispered into her burner. She hung up. I shoved the phone under my hip, burying it deep beneath the heavy mattress pad. I rolled onto my back. I let my jaw go slack. I let my mouth fall open slightly. I forced my breathing into the ragged, uneven rhythm of the dying. Rattling exhale. I heard her footsteps on the plush carpet. Soft. Predatory. I felt her presence looming over me. She blocked the moonlight. She leaned down. I smelled her. Underneath the lavender, I smelled the stale smoke of her cigarette. I smelled the Chanel No. 5 I had bought her for Christmas. It smelled like formaldehyde to me now.
She put a hand on my forehead. Her skin was cool. Then she did something that made my soul recoil. She placed her finger under my nose. She was checking to see if I was still breathing. She was checking to see if the natural causes had kicked in early. I forced myself not to flinch. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed. I forced my lungs to take a shallow, struggling breath, blowing warm air onto her traitorous finger. She pulled back. "Good night, old fool," she whispered. The words hung in the air, suspended in the darkness. Old fool. That was what she told the man who had paid off her father's debts. That was what she called the man who had given her a life of leisure. She turned and walked to the door. I heard the handle turn. I heard the latch click softly as she left the room, presumably to go downstairs and drink my wine while she waited for me to die. I opened my eyes. The darkness of the room didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like a shield. I sat up.
My joints ached. My head throbbed, not from the poison I hadn't taken, but from the pressure of the rage building inside my skull. It was a cold, hard diamond of resolve. I didn't reach for the landline to call the police. Not yet. Police take reports. They ask questions. They look at a young, beautiful wife and a prestigious doctor, and then they look at a confused old man who claims he's being poisoned. They would investigate, sure, but Elena would spin it. She would claim I was senile. Kagan would produce falsified medical records showing I was delusional. They might even use my accusation as proof of my incompetence to have me committed. No, I couldn't rely on the system I had served. The system was too slow. The system required doubt, and I had certainty. I needed to secure the verdict before the trial even began. I retrieved her phone from under my hip. My hands were steady now. The tremor I sometimes felt in the mornings was gone, banished by the adrenaline of survival. I unlocked it again. I went to the text thread. I didn't just read it. I forwarded the entire conversation, 6 months of plotting, of dosage discussions, of financial scheming, to a secure, encrypted cloud server I used for my sensitive case files, a server that only I had the key to, a server that backed up directly to the private email of the district attorney, a man I had mentored 20 years ago. Sent. I deleted the forwarded message from her sent folder. Then I did something else. I went into her settings. I turned on Share My Location and sent it to my burner phone, the one I kept in the safe for emergencies. I wiped the screen with the edge of the duvet, removing my fingerprints. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly where she had left it, angled slightly toward the lamp. I lay back down. The rage was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't a fire anymore. It was ice. I had 48 hours. 2 days. I had to play the part of the dying victim for 2 more days. I had to let her feed me poison and pretend to swallow it. I had to let her look at me with pity and disgust. I had to let them think they were winning. Because the verdict was already written, the evidence was secured, and the execution date had been moved up. They wanted a funeral on our anniversary. I would give them one, but it wouldn't be mine.
The silence of a dining room is different when the guests are waiting for the host to die. It is a heavy, expectant silence, filled with the static of held breath and the clinking of silverware against china that sounds too much like spades hitting rocky soil. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, a vast expanse of polished wood stretching out before me like a dark lake. The room was illuminated only by the flicker of tall, tapered candles and the dim glow of the crystal chandelier overhead, dimmed to a level that Elena claimed was romantic, but I knew was designed to hide the pallor of my skin, or perhaps to hide the guilt in her eyes. The air was thick, perfumed with the scent of Casablanca lilies from the massive centerpieces. To most, they smell sweet. To me, they have always smelled like a funeral parlor. I was dressed in my tuxedo, the same one I had worn to the bench and bar dinners for 30 years. It hung loosely on my frame tonight. I had spent the last 48 hours fasting, living on nothing but water and adrenaline, allowing dehydration to hollow out my cheeks. I had applied a touch of theatrical gray grease paint under my eyes, blending it into the wrinkles to simulate the exhaustion of a failing heart. To them, I looked like a man standing on the precipice of the void. To the right, Elena sat like a queen in waiting. She was wearing red. Not a subtle burgundy, but a bright, violent crimson that slashed against the dark wood of the room. It was a dress that screamed celebration. Her hair was swept up, exposing the diamond necklace I had given her 5 years ago, a necklace I knew she had already had appraised last week. She looked radiant. She looked hungry. To my left sat Dr. Kagan. I had insisted on inviting him. I want my doctor close. I had wheezed to Elena yesterday, clutching her arm with a feigned spasm, in case I have an episode. She had smiled then, a small, tight curving of her lips. She thought I was handing them the perfect alibi. If I died at the table, with my doctor present to declare the time of death and sign the certificate immediately, there would be no questions, no ambulance, no coroner, just a tragic end to a long life, witnessed by a medical professional. "You haven't touched your wine, Marcus," Kagan observed. His voice was smooth, cultured, dripping with a concern that was as artificial as the sweetener in my tea. I looked at the glass in front of me. It was a 1959 Chateau Petrus.
A bottle worth more than the car Kagan drove. He had poured it himself, decanting it with a flourish. "I'm feeling weak," I rasped. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the stem of the glass, hovering over it, then letting my hand drop back to the table with a dull thud. "The glass." Elena reached out and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm, damp with anticipation. "Just a sip, darling. It will help your blood flow. Doctor—" "In moderation," Kagan added, swirling his own glass, watching the red liquid coat the sides. "It acts as a vasodilator. It might help with the—" I looked at them. I looked at the way they exchanged a microscopic glance. A glance that said, "He's fading. It's almost time." They were giddy with it, the adrenaline of the kill. They were sitting in my house, eating my food, drinking my wine, and waiting for the poison they had been feeding me for weeks to finally stop the engine. They thought this was the Last Supper. I looked around the room. We weren't entirely alone. Standing in the shadows near the kitchen door was Frank. He was my bailiff for 20 years. He was 70 now, built like a vending machine, with a face carved out of granite. He was wearing his old suit, looking uncomfortable but alert. And sitting at the far end of the table, quiet and grim, was Mr. Sterling, my estate attorney. Elena had tried to object to their presence. "Just us, Marcus," she had pleaded, "for our anniversary." "I want my friends," I had insisted, playing the stubborn, senile old man card. She had acquiesced. She figured witnesses to my natural death would only strengthen her claim. "Perhaps," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning, "perhaps a toast first." "Of course," Elena said. She picked up her glass. Kagan did the same. I gripped the stem of my crystal goblet. I didn't lift it. Instead, I picked up my dessert spoon. Ting, ting, ting. I tapped the spoon against the crystal. The sound rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the room. It was the sound of a gavel hitting the sounding block. The room quieted. Frank straightened up in the corner. Mr. Sterling opened the leather folder in front of him. I looked down at the tablecloth for a moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until Elena shifted in her seat, until Kagan checked his watch. Then I inhaled. I filled my lungs completely, expanding my chest, shedding the posture of the invalid.
I engaged my diaphragm. "To my wife, Elena," I began. My voice didn't rasp, it didn't tremble. It boomed. It was the baritone resonance that had filled courtroom 4B for 4 decades. It was the voice of the law. Elena jumped, her hand jerked, splashing a drop of red wine onto the pristine white tablecloth. It bloomed like a gunshot wound. "And to my good doctor," I continued, turning my head slowly to look Kagan in the eye, "who has taken such—" Kagan froze. The glass hovered halfway to his mouth. He looked at me, confusion warring with the arrogance in his eyes. He saw the gray paint on my face, but he also saw the fire in my eyes. The fog was gone. "Elena," whispered. I finished for her. I sat up straight.
The slump in my spine vanished. I placed my hands flat on the table, creating a triangle of power. "Yes," I said. Elena's face drained of color. The rouge on her cheeks stood out starkly against the sudden, sickly gray of her skin. She knew. In that split second, she knew. "I don't understand," Kagan stammered, putting his glass down. "The medication." "There is no disease, doctor," I said coldly. "There is only toxicity. Arsenic. Or was it digitalis this week?" I reached under the table. My hand closed around the remote control I had taped to the underside of the wood hours ago. "I prepared a slideshow," I announced, "for our anniversary." I pressed the button. On the far wall, the large oil painting of the Italian countryside began to slide upward on motorized rails. Behind it, a massive 80-inch flat-screen television flickered to life. Elena turned in her chair. Kagan swiveled. The screen didn't show photos of our wedding in Maui. It didn't show pictures of our life together. It showed a screenshot, a text message thread, blown up to high definition. 2 more nights, natural causes. The text was white against a green background. The timestamp was from 2 nights ago. The sender was Doctor. The room went dead silent. The air seemed to be sucked out of the space, leaving a vacuum that pressed against the eardrums. "Marcus," Elena whispered. Her voice was trembling so hard the words fractured. "Marcus, someone hacked us. This is fake." "It's metadata," I said. I pressed the button again. The slide changed. It was a GPS map, a tracking history. It showed Elena's phone and Kagan's phone meeting at a motel on the outskirts of town 3 times a week for the last 6 months. "Time-stamped," I said, my voice relentless. "Geotagged."
Kagan stood up. He knocked his chair over. It crashed onto the parquet floor with a violence that made Elena scream. "I'm leaving," Kagan said. He was sweating now. The smooth facade was cracking, revealing the desperate gambler underneath. "This is insanity." He turned toward the door. "Sit down, doctor," I commanded. It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. It was the voice I used to send men to death row. It brooked no argument. Kagan hesitated. He looked at the door. Frank stepped out from the shadows. He cracked his knuckles. He was 70, but he still looked like he could punch a hole through a brick wall. He blocked the doorway, crossing his massive arms over his chest. "The judge said sit down," Frank growled. Kagan looked at Frank. He looked at me. He slumped back into his chair. Defeated. Mr. Sterling stood up. He adjusted his glasses and picked up a document from his folder. "This is the new will, Elena," Sterling said, his voice dry and professional. "Executed yesterday. Witnessed by myself and Frank." He slid the paper across the table. It stopped next to her wineglass. "You are disinherited," Sterling said. "Completely. You get nothing. Not the house. Not the stipend." He picked up another document. "And this," Sterling said, pointing to a paper with a red seal, "is the revocation of your power of attorney." I looked at Kagan. He was staring at the tablecloth, his hands shaking. "You tried to stop my heart," I said to him. Kagan looked up. "I contacted the medical board this afternoon," I told him. "I sent them the toxicology report for my own blood work, drawn by an independent lab yesterday." Kagan's mouth opened. "I'm a judge," I said. "I know how to issue a subpoena. Did you think I wouldn't check your history?" I turned to Elena. She was weeping now. It wasn't the pretty, silent crying she used to manipulate me. This was ugly. Her face was twisted, mascara running in black rivulets down her cheeks. She looked terrified. "Marcus, please," she sobbed, reaching out for me again. I pulled my hand away. "He forced me. I was scared. He said he owed money to bad people. He said they would hurt us. I did it to protect you. You love the lifestyle," I corrected her. "You love the Porsche. You love the credit card." She shrieked, "I love you," I roared. I slammed my fist onto the table. The plates rattled. The silver jumped.
"I was awake, Elena," I said softly, leaning in close to her, so close I could smell the fear coming off her skin. "When you whispered, 'He's asleep,' I was wide awake." In the distance, the sound of sirens began to wail. It started low, a mournful cry in the night, and grew louder, closer. I hadn't just called the police.
I had called the Major Crimes Unit. I had called the DA. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This was conspiracy to commit capital murder. You have about 2 minutes, I told them. If you want to eat something, I suggest you do it now. Elena looked at the window. Blue and red lights began to flash against the curtains, a disco ball of consequences. Shh, she whimpered. Save it for the jury, I said. The front door burst open. I heard the heavy tread of boots in the hallway. Police! The dining room doors swung open. 4 officers in tactical vests entered, guns drawn but lowered. Behind them walked Detective Miller, a man I had sworn in when he was a rookie. Judge, Miller said, nodding to me respectfully. Detective, I replied. The evidence is on the screen. Grab them, Miller ordered. The scene that followed was chaotic, shameful, and glorious. I sat still as a statue while they pulled Kagan from his chair. He didn't fight. He was a coward. He let them cuff him, muttering about lawyers. But Elena fought. She screamed. She grabbed the tablecloth, yanking it as the officer pulled her back. Crystal shattered. The expensive china crashed to the floor. The Petrus bottle overturned, spilling the vintage wine like blood across the hardwood. Shh, she screamed as they dragged her backward. Arthur, help me! Don't let them take me! I watched her. I watched the woman I had loved. I watched the monster who had checked my breathing to see if I was dead yet. You aren't my wife, I said, picking up my napkin and dabbing my mouth. They dragged her out. Her screams echoed down the hallway, then were cut off by the heavy thud of the front door. The room fell silent. Frank let out a long breath. I'm tired, Frank, I said. Mr. Sterling began to gather his papers. I'll handle the arraignment in the morning, Marcus. Good, I said. They left. Frank patted my shoulder and walked out to secure the perimeter. I was alone. I sat at the head of the long table. The room was a wreck, shattered glass, spilled wine, the ruins of a celebration that never happened. I looked at the empty chairs. I picked up my glass of Petrus.
It was the only one that hadn't spilled. I swirled the dark red liquid. It smelled of berries and earth and history. I looked at it. I couldn't drink it. It tasted like victory, but victory was bitter. I poured the wine onto the floor, adding to the stain. I was alone in a mansion that felt too big. My heart was broken in a way that medicine couldn't fix. But I checked my pulse. Thump, thump, thump. I was alive, and my house was clean.